Stories from Real Life is a powerful podcast where everyday people share extraordinary, true stories that inspire, move, and connect us. You won't get a lot of malarkey here. Melvin E. Edwards asks questions that you didn't even know you needed answered. But each episode gives you a lesson to learn, a reason to believe, and a second chance to be your best self. Listen to new episodes of Stories from Real Life every Tuesday and Friday. Pardon me while I go listen to this new episode right now.
On today's edition of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, our guest for this episode is Lisa Sugarman. Lisa is an author, a syndicated columnist, a 3-time survivor of suicide loss, a crisis counselor with the Trevor Project, founder of the Help Hub, and a storyteller with the National Alliance on Mental Illness.
And when we have that experience of being loved and we lose it, whether it's a breakup or whether it's a death, part of the whole process of having relationships that are meaningful is having to navigate what happens after the relationship ends in that physical form, you know what I mean, when the person is gone. So I think that's just one of the things that we all, like you said, have to get used to living with, and we have to learn how to integrate it into our life because you can't get rid of it.
Let's join today's episode with Lisa Sugarman.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me for the podcast where personal stories can have a global impact. As you heard in the intro, my guest today is crisis counselor and columnist Lisa Sugarman. Hello, Lisa. How's the weather up there in New England?
Hey, Melvin. Nice to see you. I wish I had a better report for you. The weather is not great. It's, I guess, typical New England is what it really is. Rainy and just gray, but in 5 minutes, it should be totally different.
I actually have lots of experience in New England. I'm in Texas.
Okay.
My first wife, we'll say, was from New Hampshire, and we were married in Maine, so I had lots of time up there in New England.
Okay. Yeah, I love both of those states. I'm here just north of Boston.
Okay. Much cooler up there than it is down here.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
All right. So serious topics we're going to discuss today, including suicide and mental health. So some people spend a lifetime trying to figure out their why in life. It sounds like you discovered your why after 3 people close to you died by suicide. How did you come to terms with that?
Well, I mean, that is true. It's definitely my why. And I think it found me versus me finding it is kind of what I've come to realize. Honestly, it's been a journey for sure. For me, I learned when I was 10 years old that my father passed away. And unfortunately, he had died of a heart attack. That was what I was told. That was the narrative that I lived with most of my life. And it was only about 11 years ago. So I'm 56 years old now. I found this out when I was 10 years old. And for 35 years, I lived with that story. And then when I was 45 years old, the same age my father was when he passed away, I learned that my father had actually taken his life. And it definitely upended me in so many different ways. It changed the trajectory of the work that I was doing. It changed my headspace. It changed my heart space. It changed the way I wanted to show up in the world. And I've had a couple of other losses as well. Lost a cousin the year before my father died. He died by suicide. And one of our closest friends just died by suicide about 4 years ago. So it's been an interesting decade, let's say that. And I just didn't feel like the work that I was doing anymore, which was content creation. It's always what I've done. I just did it in a different space. I did it in the parenting space. It just didn't feel authentic anymore. It really didn't. And it felt to me like it was too important, especially in the world that we're living in now, where mental health awareness is really, I think, top of everybody's mind, or it's getting to a place where it's top of everybody's mind. I really just wanted to be someone who could take the lived experience that I had, that I know so many other people have in different ways, and do something with it. So I've been advocating in the mental health space, specifically kind of in that suicide space, ever since.
Okay. So why did you become a crisis counselor with the Trevor Project?
So for anybody who doesn't know what the Trevor Project is, it's the largest LGBTQ crisis and support lifeline in the country. And we cater to LGBTQ youth ages 13 to 24, but we take calls from everybody in any demographic, but that's kind of our sweet spot. And I just felt, honestly, Melvin, like I wanted to be the person that my dad didn't have. It's as simple as that. I wanted to do something to make an impact. By that point, by the time I got involved with Trevor, I had been talking quite vocally about my story and sharing my story, and had been writing about it, and was doing a lot of interviews, a lot like this one, and really just kind of wanted to do more. Like you find your space in the world and you feel like, okay, I'm doing this thing. What can I do next? How can I make a bigger impact? And so it just seemed like a natural progression to me to be that person on the other side of the phone line, to be there to help de-escalate somebody who might have been in the same situation that my dad was in. So I got involved with them. I went through their training probably about 4 years ago now, give or take. And I've been on the Lifelines now for 3. So it's been transformative in so many different ways, just how I show up for people, how I hold space for people, and just how I understand what people really are going through in such a different way.
So when I was doing research to prepare for this episode, I wanted to find out who Trevor was. And I realized Trevor wasn't a real person. Can you tell us how the idea came about for the Trevor Project and who this Trevor person was?
Sure. So the Trevor Project has been around now for, I believe this is our 27th year. And we have operations here in the United States, across the country. We service every state in the United States. And then we also have a fairly new office in Mexico as well. It's only a couple of years old. Now, Trevor Project started, it's fictitious, but it was a short film. And it actually won an Academy Award for a short film. So it was created by three people in the movie industry who wanted to showcase a young boy who was questioning his sexuality. He was, kind of a middle school, high school age boy who was questioning his sexuality and who was getting bullied and who didn't quite know where he fit in the world. And it's a story about how he finds support and he finds allyship, and he gets close to wanting to end his life, and then ends up finding support systems to help him keep going. And when they previewed this at the Academy Awards, they felt very strongly, the creators felt really strongly about offering some kind of resource, some kind of hotline, in case people decided to call as a result of seeing this film. If it struck a chord with people, or if it was something that young people were connecting with, they just wanted people who might be viewing it to have some place to turn after seeing it. So they just established this lifeline. And I believe the number was 1,500 phone calls that first night. And they felt that it serviced such an underserviced need for support for that particular niche for the LGBTQ youth. It's been going ever since. It never shut down. It just kept going, and they kept building on it, and they kept growing it out, and they kept getting volunteers and sponsorships and endowments and things like that. And they kept growing, and they've been around ever since and have taken millions of phone calls. We take probably over 500,000 phone calls conservatively every year. And these are people who are definitely struggling with their sexuality. It's part of it is obviously there's a queer community component to it. And people are also struggling with just the same things anybody else would struggle with, regardless of what community you're in. It could be homelessness. It could be abuse. It could be a bad breakup. It could be struggling with coming out, or just suicidal ideation, anything that constitutes a mental health crisis. And so Trevor has been an incredible support system throughout this country for youth in crisis, and they continue to be. And I just feel incredibly blessed to be part of that team.
Okay, that's awesome. All right, so you mentioned already that you were 10 years old when your dad died, but you didn't know he had died by suicide. You were told he had died of a heart attack. So how did you learn how he had died?
The way that I learned was just in the most roundabout, almost silly way, I guess you could say. It was not just some big dramatic revelation. My husband and we live in a small town just north of Boston, a little harborside town. And we were having lunch at a cafe, and one of my family members, a cousin of mine who I didn't see very often, she didn't live in the area anymore, she happened to be in town, and she walked by, and we were sitting outside having lunch, and she came over, popped in a chair next to us, sat down, wanted to catch up, started asking us all about our kids. So we have 2 daughters. They're grown now, but at this point, this was 11 years ago, they were high school, junior high. And she was asking about our kids and how were they. And without even skipping a beat, she just kind of dropped a grenade on the table. And I don't think she even realized it. She asked me out of the blue if our girls had had any of the same mental illness that my father had. I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. I was unaware of any kind of mental illness. I was unaware of any kind of depression. My father was as rock solid of a human being as anyone that I would have ever thought was a rock solid human being. He was joyful and motivated, and he was so present and such a loving, devoted man that the idea that he had been mentally ill in some way or depressed in some way was just so absurd. So as quickly as she kind of dropped that ball, she just immediately turned the conversation to something else. And I just, how sometimes when you're in a moment and you're just kind of frozen, you don't really know how to process what you just heard. I didn't say anything. I just told her that at that time, and it was the truth, that our girls were fine. Later on, they both struggled a little bit with anxiety and depression, but at that time they were fine. And that's how I answered her. But I just was so confused. And I ended up talking about it with my mom probably the next day. And in the course of that conversation with my mother, not really intending on asking her, what was I missing? Was the story not true? None of that crossed my mind. None of it. So I was as surprised as my mother was when I asked if my father had been depressed, and she said yes. And then before I even knew it, I was asking her if he had taken his life. I hadn't thought about the question, wasn't intending on asking the question. It just came out of my mouth. And my mother said, yes, he did. He did take his life. And she wanted to protect me. It was hard enough to have to tell me that my father was gone, which I understood. And in that moment, there was absolutely no question. Like when I found this out, I was already married for 20 years. I already had two teenage children. So I understood that idea of being a mother and wanting to do anything you possibly could to protect your children from pain. And so I knew right in that moment that what my mother did was a gift to me, because she protected me from a whole next level kind of pain and suffering.
Do you think you would have grieved differently if you had known the truth when you were 10 years old?
Absolutely. No doubt in my mind. And the reason for that is because I mentioned earlier that my cousin, who I was 9 and he was 18, he lived right around the corner from me. He took his life a year before my father died. And I knew that was a suicide. My parents found a beautiful way of explaining to me that my cousin, his brain was sick and he was not stable in the ways that he needed to be to live to live kind of a meaningful life. He was too mentally ill to be able to function the way he wanted to, and that was hard for him, and so he ended his life. And so they communicated it to me. So it was the first time I actually experienced a death, and it was the first time I'd actually encountered suicide. And not because my parents told me, because they did not, and not because I learned this anywhere else, because I did not. It was just like my own little internal belief system that kind of grew this belief in me that suicide was selfish. And that's a really common feeling about suicide. A lot of people have it. A lot of people still have it. And I held that quietly to myself for a very, very long time, for decades, until my own father's suicide came out. And that's when I realized as an adult that you can't fault someone for being mentally ill. You can't fault someone for wanting the pain that they're in to end, and for wanting to have that agency to be able to make that decision on their own, because that's the only thing they have control over at this point. When someone's that far gone, when someone's that hopeless and desperate, the only thing they have control over is whether they stay or they go. And so I understood that, and my belief system pretty much changed overnight when I learned about my dad's suicide. But that's what it was like for me back then. I think that had I known that my own father had taken his life, I think it absolutely would have destroyed me. I don't honestly know if I would have made it through that. I don't know how I could have made it through that, knowing myself and how I was as a little kid. I think it just would have torn me apart.
I've seen where you said you basically had to mourn your dad's death twice. The first time when it happened, and the second time when you found out how it happened. Do you think grief and mourning ever end?
No, they don't. They don't. And I'll tell you why, in my own opinion. Because grief is just another form of love. And when you've lost a person, let's take away how the person passed away. It doesn't matter if it's a suicide or a car accident or a cancer, a heart attack, whatever it is. If your person is gone and it's someone who you loved, that grief takes different forms. It ebbs and flows for sure. And we learn how to integrate it into our life, and we learn how to bring joy back into our life. And we learn that joy and grief can coexist, and they have to coexist. But we never stop grieving, because you never stop loving that person. And there's never a part of you that doesn't wish that person wasn't still there with you. So no, I think it's just a lifelong process. And it's just a part of the whole human experience that none of us wants to ever face and deal with, but we all do. And if you haven't, you will. And I think for me, it was understanding that I just need to let it be what it is whenever a grief attack happens. Like, for instance, when all of a sudden, it could be after 10 years, it could be after 20 or 40 years. It doesn't have to be just in the early days where you're suffering so much. Those things never change. And it can catch you completely by surprise. You kind of have to surrender to it and just move through it in the best way that you can, and not try to fight it, because it'll catch you. It doesn't matter. You can't outrun it. So, and I don't think, honestly, any of us wants to. And that might sound weird for people listening. Like, who wants to be grieving? Nobody wants to be grieving. But when you think about why you're grieving, and the fact that you're doing it because of the love that you have for the person you lost, well, I don't want that to end, even if it means there's pain attached to it. So that's why I don't think it ever should end.
Yeah, I lost both my parents when I was pretty young. My dad died when I was 13, and my mom died when I was 25.
So I'm so sorry.
Thank you. I had death very early, and I'm almost 59 years old now and still mourning their passing. And the way I see it is, the more you love somebody, the more it hurts.
Yeah.
And that's one of those trade-offs that you have to sort of make peace with.
Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, all we want is to love and be loved. And when we have that experience of being loved and we lose it, whether it's a breakup or whether it's a death, part of the whole process of having relationships that are meaningful is having to navigate what happens after the relationship ends in that physical form. You know what I mean? When the person is gone. So I think that's just one of the things that we all, like you said, have to get used to living with. And we have to learn how to integrate it into our life, because you can't get rid of it. It's always going to be there.
Right. Absolutely. So tell us about the origin of the Help Hub and why it's become the go-to destination for mental health resources.
I love talking about the Help Hub, and I appreciate you asking so much. So the Help Hub is the platform that I launched last winter. it is very much a byproduct of all of the work that I've done as an advocate these last few years, work that I've done as a crisis counselor. I moderate a grief group that's very specific to survivors of suicide loss for Samaritans. And the Help Hub was kind of born out of all of that experience and obviously out of my own lived experience as a survivor. And I started collecting very unintentionally. I did not wake up one day and decide to create the Help Hub. The Help Hub kind of created itself. And it was because I was kind of stockpiling all of these resources that I was finding, both as a crisis counselor and as a group facilitator and as an advocate. You know, you're in the space long enough, you learn what's out there and what tools and platforms are out there. And so I was just kind of stockpiling them, and I had a list going, and my website was very much your standard website that just kind of showcased the work that you do. And since I create a lot of content, it was lisasugarman.com, and it was out there, and it was the place that I kind of showcased everything that I was doing in the world. And at the kind of the back end of my website, I started creating this directory, which was really just supposed to be like a resource page for me to share the resources that I had found. Well, I ended up finding so many of them that it became so overwhelming. There was no structure to it. It was just this crazy long list of organizations and tools. And so I decided to take a step back and see how I could organize it better. And I ultimately ended up organizing it by categories. And there ended up being 16 different categories. And those categories are really communities. Most of them are communities, like the LGBTQ community or the Asian community or the BIPOC community or veterans or the elderly. And I found, as I was doing a lot of my own work in the advocacy space, that there are all these incredible resources out there, and all of us are circulating the same ones, which is wonderful because it's getting to the people who need them. But when you start to think about who the people are who need all of these resources, the ones that people are typically circulating are pretty generic. They're the bigger organizations, and they're not specific to our unique needs based on what community we're in. So like if I'm part of the Latinx community, I might need something totally different to support my grief or my loss or my mental health than somebody who's in the elderly community or children or teens or a veteran. So I found that when I broke these into categories, I was populating these categories with resources that were very specific to that particular community, because even though we all go through things like grief and loss and depression and mental illness and anxiety, we don't all experience them in the same way because of where we come from, because our own communities have a uniqueness to them. So I wanted to create a place where people could go under one roof, so to speak, that would have resources for all of those communities that were specific to your needs in that community. And so that's what the Help Hub became. And then I curated a toolkit section as well that has, those are more generic. They're tools that, for instance, if you know someone who's struggling and you suspect they want to end their life, how do you talk to somebody like that? What do you say? It's scary to know what to say. So I have an infographic that gives you actual language. What do you say to someone who's thinking of taking their life? Or what do you say to someone who's grieving? What do you not say to someone who's grieving? How do you re-regulate yourself when you're having a panic attack? Stuff like that I felt was important to offer people as well. So there's a big toolkit section. There's also an archive, a really, really extensive archive with all of the content that I've created. I also have a YouTube channel. I have a fairly new podcast called Survivors that pipes into the Help Hub as well. So there's an awful lot there. There are crisis service links. There are there's so many different things, online mental health services, mindfulness. So it's more than just links to organizations. It's a pretty broad index of services and platforms that are on there. So it's a work in progress. It'll continue to be a work in progress. It's something that I continue to populate, and I ask people out there in the world, if you're listening to this, for instance, and you know of a resource that's not on the Help Hub, go to the Contact Me page. Send me a note. let me know what you have and I'll make sure it gets on there. I just had someone do that to me yesterday and it's already up on the Help Hub. So it's a team effort for sure.
Okay, that sounds great. And I'll have a link on the website and the show notes after this, when this episode runs.
Oh, that's wonderful.
What do we do when we find out someone we care about is suicidal?
It's a tricky situation for sure, but there are a few simple things that people can do to ensure that you're okay as the one offering the help and that the person who needs the help gets what they need. So the most important thing, honestly, Melvin, is to be direct, and it's scary, I know, because when you're talking about someone who may be suicidal or having those ideations or doesn't want to live anymore, when you're thinking about where that person's at, it's really frightening to think about being the person who's trying to help. You don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to push someone over the edge. You don't want to make it worse. But truthfully, the best thing to do is to be really, really honest, really, really direct, and to be really open-minded. And what you really have to lead with is, are you okay? Are you thinking about killing yourself or harming yourself? And I know that sounds like really, really scary language, but when you use those words that way and say to someone, are you okay? I'm worried about you. Are you okay? Are you thinking about harming yourself? You're validating the pain that person is in. Regardless of what that pain is, you're validating it and you're showing up as a safe space. You're telling that person you're taking them seriously, you're there to listen, and you want to help them. So I know it's kind of counterintuitive because most people would be like, don't ask that. It's going to push them in the wrong direction. But it actually has been proven over and over again that by asking such a direct question, it actually reduces the likelihood of someone harming themselves. So the first thing is to check in that way. And the second thing is to find out what kind of support system that person has. And if they maybe are already connected with a therapist. If they are, recommend that they get in contact with them. If they're not, maybe help them find someone. And the other thing that you can do that's most important, especially if you think that someone is at imminent risk or a high risk of harming themselves, you just give them the 988 Crisis and Suicide Lifeline number, because that is a place, that's a place that anyone can call with any kind of a crisis, where people are not trained clinicians. They do have clinicians on staff, depending on a situation. Someone can always, chime into a phone call. A clinician can pop in if needed. But most of the time you're dealing with people like me who are trained crisis counselors, and we're trained to help hold space and to give you resources and to de-escalate you and to come up with safety plans and things like that. So we are the people who can listen to whatever it is that you're going through and help you find your footing and help you come up with a plan to keep yourself safe. So the best thing anybody in the world can do is offer a person who's struggling the 988 Crisis Lifeline. It saves lives. It saves lives every day, because the people who are on the other end of the phone are there for whatever you need them to be there for, to listen and to offer help and support. So that's how I would handle a situation like that.
Okay. All right. I'm someone who tends to be pretty precise, well, very precise with the words I use. And you want people to stop saying committed suicide, that someone committed suicide.
Yes.
Why is
yes. That? So when you think about it, the way that the belief systems that we create around things, it just anything, doesn't have to be mental health, mental illness, suicide, it could be anything. Things like stigmas start because of the word choice that we use to talk about them in a lot of ways. And the mental health community in the last handful of years has really banded together to try and shift the language that's being used to talk about suicide. Because when you talk about suicide in the context of somebody committing suicide, there's an implication there that someone is committing a wrongdoing, is committing a sin, is committing a crime. it's a negative connotation. And when you use that word, you're immediately stereotyping the person. You're immediately creating a sense that this person has done something wrong or has done something immoral. And that's not the case, because when someone, you think about it, mental illness is an illness. It's no different than cancer. It's no different than heart disease. It's an illness that the person who is afflicted with it cannot control in most cases. It needs treatment. It needs care, and it needs to be acknowledged for what it is, and that it's beyond someone's control. So when someone takes their life because they just couldn't go on anymore and the pain that they were in emotionally was just too much, they shouldn't be stereotyped because they ended their life. They didn't feel like they had a choice, is the bottom line. So we have to stop using that kind of language that automatically just kind of stereotypes people. We need to preserve someone's dignity. And the way that we do that is by changing the way that we talk about the thing. And in this case, the thing is suicide. And so instead of saying committed suicide, we say the person died by suicide, or we say the person suicided, or the person ended their own life or took their own life. But we leave the word committed out of it so that it gives the person who ended their life the dignity that they deserve. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the next 2 or 3 questions I have are related to mental health and some triggers that could cause a downward spiral. So does social media make mental health more difficult?
In a lot of ways, absolutely. I think it's as great as it is terrible. I think for a lot of people out there, unfortunately, maybe they don't have a big community to draw on. Maybe they don't have a family to support them. Maybe they're out of work. Maybe the only connection that they have to the world is through social media. And when you're being inundated by these perfectly curated feeds and pages and influencers who look like everything you feel you want to be, it's really hard for a lot of people to handle that, because there's a lot of comparison that goes on. There's a lot of jealousy that it creates, and envy that it creates, and inferiority that it creates. And I think, yeah, sure, is social media beneficial in so many ways? Of course it is. Allows us to stay connected. It allows us to see the world in different ways, and it allows for so much creativity. But at the same time, on the other side of it, it can make you feel really isolated and really alone and really left out and really insecure. And it's unfortunate, because so much of what we actually see on social media is so perfectly edited to make everybody look like they're better than the person before them. And it's just not true. The reality is that what you see on social media is such a teeny, teeny, tiny percentage of what someone's life or world or work really, or relationship really looks like, or really is like. And so it's sad, because it skews things for a lot of people. And I think it makes people's headspace even worse in a lot of ways.
Okay. So as I mentioned earlier in the episode, you live in New England, and it's colder and darker than than some places like here in Texas, for instance. Does seasonal affective disorder also contribute to mental health spirals?
Oh, definitely. I mean, seasonal affective disorder is a real thing. It's, I for one, I'm a big fan. People in New England hate me because I love New England's weather. I love the winter. I'm the only person, I think, here in New England who I love snow. I ski and I snowboard, and I love being out in nature. And so I happen to love it. But I also get really affected. I've realized this the last few years. I get really affected when I'm not out in the sunlight. I get really affected by the short days, when it gets dark at 4:30 in the afternoon. I mean, it can be, and I know a lot of people here who are affected in that way, just not having sunlight, or, just kind of having months and months of dreary, dark weather and disgusting, dirty snow piled up on the side of the road. I mean, it's, there are a lot of things about it that can really make an impact on people's mental health. And I think that's why it's so important that when you can get out, even if the conditions aren't the best, most beautiful day, just get out. It's raining, throw on a raincoat. I can't tell you how many times I've run or walked in the rain just to get myself outside into the fresh air, or just sat by the window and got a little extra vitamin D. But it's definitely a real thing, and it definitely impacts people, not only just the weather itself and the shortness of the days, but just kind of the crappiness of New England weather can really affect your headspace. And, you really have to kind of find your own ways to balance that. And there are ways, it might just mean, bundling up or getting wet or, thinking outside the box, but there are things that we can do for sure.
All right. Why is it okay to not be okay?
Because we're all fallible, because life's not perfect, because when we get so wrapped around the axle about getting everything right and being perfect, we just put an enormous amount of pressure on ourselves, because the reality is that we're just not perfect. And we're not supposed to be perfect as humans, as parents, as spouses, as workers, whatever we are in the world. We're going to make mistakes, some of them bigger than others, but we don't need to add the extra pressure on ourselves to not make any mistakes in life, because it's not realistic. And not to mention the fact that when you make mistakes, you screw up, those are the best learnings. When you can course correct and see what you did wrong and learn some value from, maybe a bad decision you made, or, an unsuccessful thing that you did, that's just going to make things better for you the next time around. And it builds things like resilience, which is so important. And we don't think about that. We just focus too much on the failure parts of not being okay, or looking vulnerable, or looking weak. But the fact of the matter is, we are vulnerable, and we do have bad days, and we do have good days, and we do need to lean on people. So I think the sooner that we realize collectively that it is okay to just not be okay, and acknowledge that and accept that and integrate that into our lives, I think we're just going to be happier. I know I am. I know, I'm definitely a perfectionist by nature, but I have really kind of shifted that thinking a lot in the last several years. And I'm so much happier when I can look back at the things that I didn't do well and get some really useful nugget from that. That's what makes it worth it. I think if we do that more, we'll be happier overall, to be honest.
All right. So what are some of the challenges of normalizing conversations about mental health, suicide, grief, and loss?
It's scary stuff. And nobody wants to talk about it, because nobody wants to appear vulnerable. Nobody wants to appear weak. Nobody wants to talk about things that are cringy or scary or dark. But the fact is, these things exist in our world. These things exist in our life. We're all touched by them. If you haven't lost someone yet, you are a lucky person, and you will. And that's the truth. If you haven't failed yet, or lost a job, or lost a relationship, or a friendship, or whatever the case, you will at some point. And so it becomes so important to just recognize that and accept that. And once you do, I think people are just going to be happier overall.
All right. So you work with people dealing with mental health crises and people who've lost someone by suicide. Do you ever feel overwhelmed when you're dealing with these types of topics all the time?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, when I kind of deconstruct my life, and I have this conversation with my husband, Dave, all the time, when I deconstruct things and I think about how I spend my day, I'm either on a Lifeline, running a support group, writing content that has something to do with suicide or grief or loss or mental illness or depression. And everything that I do more or less now revolves around that. And so it can be really, really heavy, and I'm human and I feel that. I get triggered. Most definitely I get triggered, but I know what those triggers are. So I know how to prepare for them. I've learned how to prepare for them. I've learned what barriers, or maybe boundaries is a better word, what boundaries to put in place to protect myself. And I've learned what I need as far as self-care. And I really stay pretty committed to my own self-care practice. Like, for instance, I know that every day of my life, I need to get up and start my day by meditating. So that's what I do. And I know that I need to move my body, whether I'm lifting weights or I'm going for a run or I'm practicing yoga or I'm paddleboarding, like whatever it is, like I know that I need that. I need time and space away from the groups and away from the hotlines and away from my computer screen. And I do those things. And things like journaling, I've had a lifelong journaling practice just to kind of offload the things that I either feel in my own heart or things that I feel as a result of conversations or groups or, exchanges that I have with other people. And it's important. And we all know what we need. We all just don't always give ourselves what we need. So I try to stay pretty conscious of that, because what I deal with is really heavy. It's really, really heavy. But I think what I've also learned is that over the years, now that I've been in this space for a long enough time, I know that I'm in the right space doing the right work, because I don't know how, because I'm a super empathic personality type and I feel everything around me all the time. I've learned that I guess I have a capacity to be in this space and to do these things and to be surrounded by it in the ways that I am and maintain that balance. I'd like to think it's because of the way that I, maintain that daily practice in my life. But I also think it's just, I guess it's how I'm wired. So I'm grateful for that I can handle it. So, but I pay close attention to how I feel and to how things land.
Okay. And final question today.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you like to leave with the listeners?
I think above all, just know, like if you're listening to this, especially if you're someone who is struggling, and there's so many people out there right now in the world who are struggling, or if you know someone who's struggling, because there are so many of those people too, I think I would just say, whatever you're feeling right now, whatever your struggle is, just know that it's not forever. Just know that there will be a way that you're going to cycle through it. There will be a time when you will come out of this place that you're in and you'll be in another place, hopefully a better place. And to just give yourself grace and permission to kind of sit in whatever you're in at the moment. And also the same grace to reach out for help when you need it, whether it's to the people around you, your friends, your family, your community. And if you don't have any of those, you're still not alone, because you've got places like the Trevor Project and places like the 988 Crisis Lifeline. Use those, lean into those, take advantage of those, because they can make all the difference in the world.
All right. So our guest today has been crisis counselor and author Lisa Sugarman. Lisa, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your wisdom.
Oh, thanks, Melvin. I really appreciate the conversation.
Please go to my website at podcastreallife.com for more information about my guest and the things we discussed today, including the links to her website and to her books. That's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.